What's good, everybody? Welcome back to the Flight Time Podcast. I'm Dono, and joined with me is Billy Kyle. This is episode number 25.
Yeah, 25. So we we wrapped up our CES talk last week, discussed the V Falcon, and I think that there's something overshadowing all these drone releases that kind of has us surprised that we're even seeing drone releases, and that is Remote ID, which I have to say right off of the bat, I haven't done a lot of research with or on. I know you made a video about it. I've seen some other videos about it. I know that they released like a document that's hundreds of pages long, but I just haven't dedicated time to continue to keep up with it. So Ken, why don't you do a little bit of a refresh for me and for anybody else as to what Remote ID is?
All right, so really super brief, because I'm sure most that are listening have maybe familiarized themselves with this. Remote ID proposal from the FAA states that you would need basically a transmitter allowing a third party to access your location, altitude, and basically anything that you are up to while you're flying. They basically stated that there would be two types of remote ID, limited and standard. Limited would only allow you 400 feet away from your ground station, and standard would allow you to pursue normal operation. However, it would require a internet connection. So if you were in a location that doesn't have internet, well, you would be basically only able to use the limited flight. So there's a lot of controversy around this, because you would have to subject yourself to third-party data collection, which is supposedly, from everything I've read, it's actually a violation of multiple rules in the Constitution. So
I saw that there were some people saying that it was like illegal and potentially
it is. Like if you dive down deep into it and really analyze like what they have proposed, it actually is. So it violates that information.
Yeah, I haven't spoken out about it yet on my YouTube channel. I've gotten some people asking for my thoughts on it, and the reason I haven't spoken about it is just because I'm not educated on it, and I just don't want to create a video like talking about something that I don't really know a lot about. But it's funny because I remember back in like 2016, probably later than that, because I didn't even start my channel in 2016, but I made a video about something that DJI proposed, which was basically like license plates for a drone.
Right.
Which is pretty interesting, because now we're getting to like a whole entire different animal, which is essentially like a license plate, but it seems to be like a whole lot more. Now, the fact that you need an internet connection, I think that that's something that I've seen a lot of people stand up against, because there are a lot of people that fly in areas where either the internet isn't the strongest, or there's just a really weak signal where you can't get any reception at all. But think about all the people that also fly with like an iPad that doesn't even have an internet connection on it. So would the drone require an internet connection, or would the actual device require one,
They haven't stated one way or another whether or not your controller has to have internet connection, or if it's your drone that has to maintain the connection. My thought would be it's got to be your controller.
Mm-hmm. So the controller itself, or like the mobile device?
I believe it's got to be
because imagine.
All right, so
imagine if it's the controller that has an internet connection, then you might even be paying even more for like an internet connected device, even though you have one in the mobile device that you already have.
Right. I mean, and that's the problem with what they've proposed, is that it's not clear enough for which way they're going to go with this. Like, because we already have, most of our cell phones can transmit information. Why isn't that good enough? If they're looking to, collect information for whatever reason. But then part of me sort of like this. This is my take on this, is the fact that, all right, so there hasn't been any accidents with a drone involving an aircraft. No fatalities, no major incident. There hasn't been anything, and most of the drones that have been in violation of certain airspaces have been able to be safely landed with specific drone deterrent. What is it? Those drone, they call them the drone cannons, whatever the hell they are. the anti-drone guns that they use. But that's been more than sufficient to basically bring down a drone that is in an area. Maybe there's a delegate, a football game, whatever. So I just feel like this is unnecessary on multiple fronts. This is big. This is corporate brothers really is speaking volumes for this push for this remote ID.
Think about how dangerous those drone guns are. Like if you see one and you shoot it out of the sky and then it becomes a falling projectile. Also you're shooting something into the air and like...
Well, they're not. That's the thing, though. Basically, what a lot of these drone, like they're like, it's like a laser, basically. And what it does is most of them will intercept the communication, the signal between your drone and your RC, and it hijacks that signal. It usually works mostly with, let's say, DJI drones, for instance. Mm-hmm. And you can basically navigate a drone to a safe landing.
So it basically takes over the signal.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
So that's because they don't want to wreck the drone, because they need to know who the pilot is. Mm-hmm. They need information off there. So most of the time they're bringing it down safely. For instance, the Orange Bowl that's here in Florida. I think it was like the Gamecocks were playing somebody else, but I can't remember. But it was in Orlando. Dude takes up an Inspire 2.
Wow, I'm surprised he was even able to.
Well, yeah, exactly. So it wasn't that it was a no-fly zone, but as soon as he was up in the air, people were telling me within moments they can see police lights, and they basically shut it down. Like from that general direction, there was police lights, and he was already landed. So I don't know if they took it down with a cannon, but I mean they were on it like just that quick. So I mean, again, just shows you hasn't been an incident where there was anything. So there's nothing that sparked this. This is Amazon, this is, UPS, anybody in the logistics business looking to secure, safe passage for their vessels at this point.
Yeah. And so you think that because of this whole package delivery thing with drones, that's why remote ID was put into place, why it's
think
proposed?
So. I really think so. I mean, there's what other logical means would there be for that? I keep going back to and thinking like to myself, I'm like, all right, so let's just rationalize here for a moment. So every day I commute back and forth. Sometimes not every day because I work from home, but most of the time I'm commuting. And on the road, I shared that roadway with the mailman, the FedEx trucks, the UPS trucks, DHL, which I can't stand. All these trucks are on the road, and we coexist in our vehicles. And UPS, FedEx, nor the Department of Transportation, DMV, they don't know where I'm at on the road. They don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And we have accidents, and insurance handles that. So why is this different if we're capped at 400 feet? We're limited to the areas in which we can already fly. I don't understand this further need to nanny, whether it be the hobby or just this industry as a whole. I don't understand. Like, none of that makes sense.
You're right. That's actually such a great analogy about the roadways. I think that airspace is a little bit more high stakes because, if there's an accident, it's almost always
you don't get second chances with airspace. I get that.
Yeah.
I get that. But you have from 0 to 400 feet in elevation. You have 400 feet to, let's say, 1,000 feet where you have helicopters and everything else that could potentially travel.
But not always.
Anything beyond that. But not always. But not always.
They fly low sometimes.
Right. So my thought process is, why is it that the FAA needs to know where we're at? It's from what it sounds like, and everything that I've read and has gone into my research, is that there sounds like there's going to be a lot more delivery units, a lot more delivery drones than there are us. So wouldn't it make more sense that we know where they are so we can avoid them rather than them trying to avoid us? Because we're going to be a lot more sporadic, right? Mm-hmm. A pilot that's flying as a hobbyist may be here, maybe over at this park today and not there tomorrow, as to where these delivery units, they will probably most typically run the same type of residential routes over and over again. So I think it just makes more sense that we know where they are. I think it's more of a high stakes. They need to let us know. Plus, too, they're going to be flying over people's properties.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, most hobbyists and most drones aren't flying over people's properties. Like, we've got more interest in things to look at than, somebody's backyard. We don't care.
Exactly.
But, like, the reality is, these people are these new whatever it is that Amazon and UPS are looking to put out there to make their delivery process a little bit more seamless, has a lot more risk than we have.
And
so
plus,
I don't know if they're just blanketing the industry at this point.
Yeah, well, depending on how they carry these deliveries and depending on how the payload is concealed or how it's being held by the drone, you could deal with something falling from the sky from that drone, because not only is it carrying a camera, but it's carrying like a package. So drone delivery from a consumer standpoint seems like such a great idea. Like, yeah, I want my Amazon packages faster, and delivering by drone would be great. But then as somebody who flies drones, trying to think about how it's integrated into the airspace just seems like a nightmare. And remote ID is probably the FAA's best way to go about doing this, but from a drone pilot standpoint, it's just like, no, it's not. I think that ADS-B is going to be such a good way to go with all of these new DJI drones coming out. Just being able to know where these other helicopters are or where these other manned aircraft are. And I think that, just like you said with the road analogy, how they don't know exactly where I'm at all times, but if they're right there, they can see me. Well, I understand that seeing a drone could potentially be hard. So if you want access to some greater freedom, and if you have an ADS-B drone enabled, I think that that's just the way to go about it, so that me as somebody on the ground can see where the manned aircraft are in the sky, and then they can also see where I'm at. And I feel like remote ID just takes it to a step that you just don't need. Especially
no, we don't, because what's next? Are they going to bug our cell phones? I mean, at that point, from basically the rule that they have proposed puts us into, dare I say, communist territory.
Communist Russia.
Yeah, I mean, for God's sakes, it's just absurdity. And I bet you that they put that proposition out there as a feeler. Some people have said, well, they're going to do whatever they want. And that's true, they can, but at the end of the day, it doesn't take much for people to rise up against this proposal, fight it hard, and win. And I personally feel like they put this out as like a feeler, just to sort of get a good temperature of what people would think, or if anybody would say anything at all. Again, we've got 60 days to comment. You know damn well what's going to happen. After 60 days, they're going to go back to the drawing board and say, listen, there's going to be way too much opposition for us to get this off the ground smoothly. They're not stupid. Like, it would be naive of any pilot to believe that they would proceed forward with a proposal like that. Like, right? Wouldn't you believe like that? There's no way. There's no way. I just can't believe they would do that.
Again, coming from now just a standpoint of hearing you describe it and hearing it from a couple of other people and not taking the time to actually read it, it doesn't sound like it's fully there. It sounds like it is definitely in favor of those big corporations, of the FAA themselves, of manned aircraft, and they kind of just give us the short end of the stick. And I hear people say that, one of these days we're only going to be limited to these fields or whatever, to fly in. Like,
I don't think it's gonna come to that.
No,
I really don't. Like, we have 3 years before this happens. Do I think it's going to become more complicated? Yeah, absolutely. It's most certainly going to become more complicated, but it's not going to be impossible. It may just, if you look at it from this perspective, it may just be safer. But the reality is, right now, like when we're at CES and asking, a lot of these companies, hey, what's your plans to address this remote ID? Most of them, and the only one I didn't get a chance to ask was DJI, because there was really nobody there that had a clue anyways. I did see Brendan walking around, but he was slammed with interviews. But, for the most part, everybody I asked about this at the other manufacturers sort of were scratching their heads like, well, it's sort of a wait and see. And really, it is a wait and see, because 3 years is a long time, and it's a long time in technology, because think about how often we trade our phones. Think about how often everybody is so excited about the next Mavic. most people will probably only keep a drone for maybe tops 2 years. And reality is, with them not being serviceable, that's about probably all you should keep a drone with multiple hours, especially if you do this professionally, with an exception of like an Inspire or maybe an M210 or something like that, where you could, send it in for service because it would logically make sense.
And financially.
But for our drones, right, financially it makes sense to do that. But for a Mavic or for anything else, a Phantom, Evo, you're probably going to want to upgrade. And I can understand people's apprehension for wanting to buy right now, but I think as of this moment, we're pretty safe. Mm-hmm. I would say we're pretty safe.
Just like you say, I think you said it in last podcast or the podcast before, but buying a DJI drone is like buying something that's future proof, because they've had like a little remote ID thing built in there since the Spark. So if remote ID comes to fruition and if we see it, enabled in any capacity, and if you have a DJI drone, chances are they're going to future proof that drone. Whereas if you go out and you buy something from Autel or Power Vision or maybe even X Dynamics, chances are it's not going to have the necessary hardware on board in order to comply with whatever the FAA is requiring manufacturers to install on their drones moving forward. So, as we say, there are certain things that kind of make technology instantly obsolete, and that would be the thing for drones. Is like if moving forward you can't fly a drone without this certain hardware that transmits this certain signal, well then you're stuck, I don't know, like using it as a paperweight, maybe sending it in and getting some sort of upgrade added to it. Maybe they can open it up and put the required hardware inside of it. So there's a lot of things to think about when doing this, and I think that the proper way to approach it is that if there is this necessary hardware required in the future, that they don't limit people who already have drones, but instead it's kind of like you're grandfathered in, right? I mean,
right.
I think that'd be...
And I mean, as of right now, like, I people got mad because I said, relax, don't get, all crazy and bent out of shape over this right now, because a lot of people will dwell on this, because for some, it's a hobby, it's a community, it's everything, right? So the best way to combat this at the immediate moment is to leave an educated comment on the FAA's proposal. There's a page, we can link it down in the description of this podcast below, to where you can leave a comment for the FAA to read. Don't copy and paste somebody else's comment, because those will automatically be disqualified as a viable comment. Mm-hmm. Leave something of constructive feedback for the FAA to work for, because what they're going to end up doing is people are going to read this. If there's 500,000 comments at the end of this, you bet your bottom dollar they're going to hire people to read this, to understand a common ground in which that most people are leaning towards. I mean, that's how this type of stuff works. So it has to be educated. It has to be articulated. Really, really, truly think about it. Read through the existing comments that are there so you can understand sort of a format you want to lean towards, and then put it out in your own words of what you want to say. Whether you're, an FPV flyer, whether you're a camera drone, or you're a commercial guy, it's all going to negatively affect us eventually. And this is something that I think too, whether you're here in the States or you're over like in the UK or Europe, you need to pay close attention to, because as a reminder, Amazon, FedEx, UPS, and other courier services are all looking towards this as like sort of a standard and what they're going to do. And if it's money here in the US, it's money there over in Europe as well that's on the table to get this off the ground.
Yeah, and I feel that what a lot of these different countries do when they're making up their drone laws, whatever agency is in place of making up the drone laws, they always kind of follow suit with whatever the FAA is doing. So if something pops up here that a lot of these other countries look in and say, wow, that's a good idea, they could instill that. Now, this or last semester, I took a class about privacy and surveillance, and we learned about how, who is it? It's over in the UK or over in Europe. They have much more strict privacy laws. So I wonder how something like this would go over if it was proposed, if the government would even think about proposing it because of the privacy laws instilled. But I think that at the end of the day, and just to kind of generalize everything and take a stance in my own words, if other people can see where my drone is at, okay, that's fine. Like if manned aircraft can see where my drone is at, that is okay with me. But I don't want people knowing where I am, where my remote controller is. I mean, chances are I'm standing right there next to my drone anyway, so what's the difference? But I think it was Russ in his video who said, well, typically when I'm flying a drone, I've got a ton of expensive equipment on me, and if somebody uses an app and can see where the drone is and where the operator is, they're going to go, and if they've got bad intentions, rob that person.
Exactly. And that was my fear when I initially read that, is that I don't think that's anybody's business to know my location, because you're right, expensive equipment. When I'm typically flying at a house, I have my gimbal, my camera, flashes, whatever, my wallet on me. Or sometimes if I'm just out flying a location, like I could be out in the woods or something, flying whatever, I don't, you know what I mean? I usually carry when I am working, because in Florida the concealed carry is a thing. But you know what I mean? That I can just see there could be a lot of negative things that could occur. And you know what? The FAA is going to have to live with that if they put something on us that potentially, could take somebody's life because a malicious person, does something stupid, a premeditated act based upon whatever application or violation of privacy they put out there. So again, I don't think it's going to come to that. I really think that they're going to end up finding that there's way more opposition across the board, and even on the commercial side, this is going to put a strain on operators that are just trying to do business like they have been over the past couple of years successfully, and then they can't because maybe they're in an area where a Dust Bowl state, out in Kansas or something, they're doing some crop, spraying crops or mapping a cornfield or something. And there's areas where you just don't have service. It's limited. And you have, 200 acres of field as far as the eyes can see, and you have to map that. No, that's just not going to fly.
It's so true. And I think that what I said kind of, instead of talking about remote ID, I think that mine was more directed at what DJI wanted to do, where it's an application.
That's just a bad idea. I understand what DJI wants to do because they're getting a lot of crap because obviously, the U.S. is very, very concerned with the information that these drones are transmitting back and forth. Again, that's why the government agencies are no longer allowed to use DJI software. And that's even why some electric companies that use drones for inspections of their equipment have stopped using DJI. But again, we don't really have an American company that can really say, oh yeah, hey, we're the perfect replacement. Not as of yet anyways.
Yeah, so here's the thing, right? First of all, I think DJI, Brennan Schulman, because he's the one that is just voicing his opinion. He, no matter what, they're going to be on the side of the consumers. Whatever the consumers want, it's going to be about them, because that's where they make their money. They sell drones. They want to make sure the consumers can buy them and fly them. So that's a good thing, and they have a really powerful voice. So I think that having them on our side is a good thing, and they're going to be the first ones to listen. If they propose something about an application that you can use to track drones and people say no, they're going to listen, and they're not going to do that because then maybe people won't buy DJI drones. So it's just logic. But at the end of the day, I think that there's only really one group of people that should be concerned where drones are, and those are the ones that are in manned aircraft. Now, if I'm on the ground flying my drone and I can see where other drones are, that'd be nice, because I know that sometimes when we're out, we're like, oh, is that you up there? No, that's not me. And there's like somebody else flying a drone. So then you've got to be conscious and not run into them or get over and get into their airspace. So, being able to see where other drones are, that would be awesome. Being able to see where other manned aircraft are, that's awesome. But once you start to bring in the general public, it's just like adding a factor that you don't need. It's like they probably don't care. Maybe the police officers care and you can give them some sort of access. But when it comes down to it, the average Joe is not going to sit there and just be looking at where drones are. And I don't think that they need to have that power or that authority.
Right. And that's my overall thought on this, is that they don't need to know this. But again, I think that, I think a lot of people are really just freaking out and panicking, over this situation, because it's the fear of the unknown, right? And the reality is things like this typically do work out. I remember it was like May or something. I was thinking like towards the end of May, people were flipping out because they were no longer able to fly in controlled airspaces. Like if they wanted to fly in a controlled airspace as a hobbyist, you would have had to gone to an AMA field to fly. And they said, well, the new Lance app is going to be ready to go for digital authorization. And there was a lot of speculation on whether or not they would have met their deadline for the end of summer. And you know what? Surprisingly, they did. They did meet the deadline, and then everything was back to normal. You want to fly near an airport.
They did. And well, you know what? Even as a 107 pilot, this is now just grouping everybody in. They did, but it's like you still go to some places and they don't allow authorization through Kitty Hawk or something like that, so then it makes it even more of a pain in the butt. So it's like, yeah, they kind of like fixed it, but then they also just kind of made a new problem appear while fixing it. So it's not perfect, but I think it is a step in the right direction.
I think it's a step in the right direction, and we've got at this point from right now we've got I think 36 more days of the comment window, maybe longer than that. Maybe it's like 40 days left in this comment window, in which it'll probably take them at least 30 days or so to process through these comments and then propose a new appeal. Like, because I mean, if they're going with due process, that's their next step, is to come up with a new plan, propose that. But I hope it's a little bit more of an open forum, like it's not so archaic with the thought process, because there really isn't any need. I mean, could you imagine if we had to go through this? Like, every car had to be equipped with some sort of transmitter so the DMV knew how fast we were going, and that if you broke the law, if you went 10 miles over, that you would automatically get a speeding ticket. I mean, this is the equivalent of what they used to do. Remember those red light cameras? Yeah. Florida banned the red light cameras because it was unconstitutional here to be ticketed by a machine. Everybody who was fined by the state of Florida and paid fines got their money back.
That's so awesome.
And we banned them. So it's the same thing. Like, that's my fear, is that you put these pieces of the puzzle into effect, and then all of a sudden people start getting fines if they have to deviate, or they're now having to respond to the FAA. I mean, it's just silly. I don't know. I just find it silly. I mean, we all know that we're going to give way to an aircraft. Like, that's rule number one. I think they should just make better testing, make sure more competent people have drones in their hands, and then if worst case scenario, we have some sort of anti-drone units to defend areas of concern. I mean, at that point, that's what we should have.
Yeah, we've got those red light cameras up here in Philly on a couple of areas, so they're not fully banned up here yet, and I don't know if they will be.
They will be. They will be. It's like a whole ordeal. They got it out of here, so I was pretty thankful for that, because I got nailed by a couple of them when I lived in Lakeland.
Well, it's kind of insane how bright the flash is that they have when shooting at nighttime.
It's nuts.
It's kind of startling. You're like, oh, what was that? But yeah, so back on track here. Think about it this way, right? We're talking about how it's going to require an internet connection, and chances are, if you're in an area that doesn't have an internet connection, well, then there's probably not a whole lot of manned air traffic around you.
Let's even back up a bit further, because beyond the internet connection, they're talking about a third-party service having to collect this data, which one of the things they proposed was a subscription to this service. They didn't really specify what that would cost, but again, there would be an additional cost imposed on pilots to be able to use the service. And again, you may not be guaranteed that you would be able to use the standard broadcast. So again, there's a lot of things, there's a lot of holes in their plan. And I just I don't know. I've got some really, really strong views on this. And it fires me up even just thinking about it.
A third party collecting data kind of sounds like Cambridge Analytica.
It's just right, and it's just shady all the way around the board. I mean, What a money grab. What a money grab. You make us pay you $5 to register a drone. You make 107 pilots pay you per occurrence that we're registering a drone. You're making us pay $150 to certify. You only allow us to have that, maintain that license for 2 years before having to recertify, in which you're going to give us 20 questions at another $150. I mean, honestly, what a racket. What a racket. You are making countless dollars, and you nickel and dime people, and then you want to make us run through a maze like mice? I mean, pound salt.
Shoot, dude, we got to do that this year.
Yeah, exactly. That's what make me think about it, because come October, or before October, we need to be ready to go before the 19th, because we took our tests on October 19th, 2018. 2018, October 19th, we have to go recertify before that date to make sure life is good. You know what I mean? It's like, It sucks. It sucks. I think that window should be like 3 years, to be honest with you.
Right.
3 years seems a little bit more acceptable or reasonable, but
with how often the FAA changes their mind, I think 2 years works perfectly.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, the problem is they change their mind, and then it takes them forever to implement changes, which is a whole nother, process and problem.
Yeah, and chances are they kind of like put the what is that saying? They put the horse before the carriage, or they put the carriage before the horse.
They put the cart before the horse.
Yeah, like, and that was a prime example of that is the Lank system. Like, they're like, oh, you can't call up the tower anymore, but don't worry, in a couple of months you can just do an online certification.
How half baked was that shit? I mean, who's monitoring like the land? You know what I mean? Like the authorizations of any of that at the anyways, like, because like I remember when I used to call the tower when that was still a thing. Like I felt like the control was just like sort of like, yeah, whatever, thanks.
Oh man, but dude, how much of a pain in the ass that was. I'd have to call the Philadelphia tower every once in a while. Honestly though, I don't do much flying down there, and it's a good thing, because like there's not really many cool things to fly where PHL is, so it's nice that I'm not interfering with that, because I'd just be a constant pain and a constant battle with them. But sure. I called PHL, I got transferred around to different people, I got oh wait, what are you calling about? So like it makes it for the better. And I know that there's a lot of different views about the FAA, whether or not they're in it for the money, whether or not they're in it to make the lives of drone pilots easier, whether or not they're actually trying to control the skies. You can have your own opinion, but at the end of the day, they've got to make sure that they adhere to everybody's wants and needs. And I think that this whole comment process is a really good way to go about it, because they're able to propose exactly, I guess, how they think things should be, but then they take into account what everybody else says. And it seems like everybody has a lot of the same thoughts. We don't want to have an internet connection. We don't want to have to pay money. We don't want to have to give up our personal location. Okay, you can know where the drone is, but just don't show where I'm at. So there's a lot of really good thoughts. There's a lot of really good people on our side as drone pilots, like DJI and some of the people that represent DJI. So I have to say that Remote ID, it ain't it, Chief, but I think that it's not going to get passed. It's not gonna.
I don't think it will either. And I mean, it would be an absolute long shot if it did. And I would absolutely eat my words at that point if and when it did. But the reality is, there's so much money on the table here between manufacturers and organizations that rely on drones for inspections, and beyond that, just the millions of hobbyists nationwide and even afar. You got to remember, there's people sort of keeping an eye on this situation overseas, thinking to themselves like, all right, we need to know how to contend with this should this issue arise here locally. And in some places it's already happening, but every CES we go and look, guess what's there? There is personal transportation drones being debuted as prototypes.
Yep.
We'd be remiss to think that eventually one day, Chevy, Ford, Toyota wouldn't be offering something that flies as the means of your transportation. Hell, we may be, seeing that littered in the skies. So I mean, inevitably, we have to keep that in our mind, that this hobby of flight, it's very fragile. And as technology progresses, these are some of the things we're always going to be battling something. I feel like this hobby is very taxing on the mind, because you're always battling something. As soon as we secure one rule, or we make like headway on one thing, something else pops up. It's like playing a constant game of whack-a-mole with regulations.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, so I think that's everything I've got to say about it. Ken, I think you took the brunt of the talking this time. I really got to save my voice today. Thank you for that.
Well, yeah, you usually talk a lot, though, man. I had to give you a breather. I had a lot to say about this, because it's something that, again, like, a lot of people are freaking out about it. And I think for the most part, be calm, cool, and collected. I've said that before. I can't say that enough, because I've read through a lot of these comments, and they are just they come across very disgruntled, incoherent. They just don't make a lot of sense. And if you want to be taken seriously, you have to be articulated. You have to be calculated. And that's the only way you're going to get anything done. So that's all I got to say about that. I'm going to shut up now.
Yeah, and there's really not a reason to freak out about remote ID yet. We just have to stay calm. We have to show that we really care, and that we really are valuing safety as drone operators. Right. And I think that in the end, it's going to work out for us.
Right.
I think
because
we'll be fine.
What does a pilot do in a case of emergency? They keep their head, and they make sure that above all, their passengers or their craft is guided safely to its destination. So that's totally how you got to go into that mentality with. So that's going to do it for episode number 25. If you guys aren't already, make sure you check us out on Twitter, because that's where we're interacting with all of you in real time. I'm at Original Dobo. Billy is at Billy Kyle. And we will see you back again for episode number 26.
See you guys
later.